Now that it's been 2 years since the last time we have visited, I'd like to give you all a big welcome back to the channel and to the world of Inkunzi. Now, I've run quite a few Nation RPs at this point with varying degrees of success, but this one will always stand out as maybe one of the greatest of all time. Project Inkunzi ran from November of 2020 until April of 2022, with hundreds of players partaking in the game over that span of time. There were nearly 2,000 character submissions and nearly 1,000 nation submissions during the runtime of Project Inkunzi. This series will get into what exactly happened here in the game from the very beginning to the end. And yes, I am aware that I made a video about a large war in this game's history, and you are all patiently waiting for part 2, but I have thought about this a lot since I last made that video, and I think we need to take a step back all the way to the beginning to get a better understanding of what actually is going on. So sit back, relax, grab your popcorn, and let's get into this. Oh boy, where do I even begin here? This is what the map looked like when the game started. As time moved on in game, more and more of the map was revealed to players. For now, this central region here was only visible, so you are actually seeing more than they could. Also, there were what we like to call NPC nations all over the map that shared cultures with the existing player nations and were just added to fill in the map a little bit more. We didn't have hundreds and hundreds of players waiting to get in the game back then, so we had to use these NPCs to flesh out the world a little bit. But most of those aren't shown here, and I'll probably instead show some floating names for whenever they are important. Also, some player nations aren't shown here and won't be until they are important. There's a lot to go through in this video, so I can't waste any time explaining every detail of everyone that was here, but slowly as they rise the ranks of the importance scale, I'll show them on the map. At this very start of the game, no one was important, no one was strong, and the level of customizations for their nations were small. These are the tribal days, where every border you see here is more of a suggestion of where certain tribes are operating rather than a real enforceable border. Slowly, these tribes will become stronger and stronger until we can no longer really call them tribes. I'm going to cover everything important that happened back during the tribal days here in this video. Let's start here in the Fellowship of Baitos. In the first week, these three nations, Yarol, Amali, and Oskitania, unified into a religious union called the Fellowship of Baitos, as they all worshipped the same religion. But it goes deeper, as each of the three main cultures have a special connection to one of the three, what they call ascendants, but were what we would call a prophet. The Yaroli had a connection to the first ascendant, Kal. The second, Aliko, had a connection to the Oskitan, and the third, Merla, had a connection to the Amali. We won't spend too much time on the Fellowship until a little later, but they are very important to at least acknowledge that they have some centralized power and really became the first nation with a sphere of influence in the game. Now with that being said, peace and religion isn't the only way to unite people. Most often, the way to unite people, in this game at least, is force, and that would define the people and eventual rivals of the Fellowship, the Mungai. So far, we have only talked about humans in this world, but there is plenty of variety of race of beings here. We will get into them as we go, but this is a great time to mention that the Mungai are not humans, but animate mushrooms and fungus people, which adds a little bit of validity as to why these people would eventually become one of the primary antagonists in the world of Inkunzi. But for now, they are just some scattered tribes on the northern coast of a desert. Immediately, with the Mungai, a religious disagreement between that of the tribes of Io and Mio takes place. To make it simple, the king of Io, Josbal, invaded Spol for siding with Mio on the religious issue. Mio would respond by assembling a small fleet of transport ships to bring their army to the shore and defeat Io, killing Josbal. The leader of the Mio, Pausbal, yes, they are all named something Bol, then declares the unification of the Mungai people, and renames his kingdom the Agari Omu Ilam, a name that would in the future strike fear and hatred into many around them. Let's build a little bit of reputation on that. Speaking of non-human races, the Carlton people, another D&D-esque race, are a race of crab-human hybrids. To many, they are the most vile-looking things in this world, and would play a huge role in shaping the modern world down the line. The two players here have conquered their NPC neighbor nations, and formed the North Flying Fish Federation and the South Flying Fish Federation. Settlers from the Southern Federation, however, had been slowly expanding southward through the desert, where settlers of the newly formed AOI had also been attempting to settle. Clashes between peasants and farmers began to occur, and it was only a matter of time before the governments got involved. Let's just take a second and sit back to imagine angry mobs of crab-human abominations battling with humanoid mushrooms. Pretty good stuff from the game already. The army of the South Flying Fish Federation moved into the disputed land and began to arrest settlers from the AOI, which caused Pausable of the AOI to declare war. His army was then moved into the area via his fleet. Spies were also moved from the AOI into both the North and South Federations, disguised as merchants, but many of them were arrested and deported back to the AOI. In the North, a group was sent back with the message, "We will not betray our brethren in the South." However, concerningly, when the South asked the North to honor its alliance and join the defense of the South, the North refused, citing monetary and administrative issues. Something fishy is going on here. The armies of the AOI and the Southern Federation met in the disputed desert, and despite being evenly matched at around 15,000 troops each, the army of the AOI narrowly won the battle. The Southern army began to retreat, only to receive the news that the North had sent its army not to their aid, but to capture the capital of the South and unify the Carleton people. The Southern army rushed back to the city only to find it occupied, and when they tried to take it back, their army was destroyed. The AOI and the Northern Flying Fish Federation signed a peace, splitting the disputed land. This would only be the beginning of a pattern of behavior from the Carleton people involving betrayal and treachery. Before we move to the next topic, on a side note, this game, for whatever reason, has had a lot of Portuguese and Brazilian players. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, don't worry. We segregated their chat on the Discord for a while. The players that speak Portuguese sometimes like to do a little trolling, and the names named by them often translate into funny things. So if you read Portuguese, you might be in for a treat. So what is going on in Portugal? While we were talking about crabs and mushrooms, a warlord of the Braga people, Zenubius, had been on a warlord spree, invading all of his neighbors. This has caused quite an issue in the area, as the Fellowship of Baitos had been watching it carefully. More importantly, Zenubius was doing this in the name of some dark and mysterious religion, citing the cleansing of heretics as his reasoning. The Fellowship of Baitos began to expand their sphere of influence by making a key ally with the Prislahan Trade Republic and the rest of the independent Oscitan tribes, which now border the Warlord Empire. The Fellowship began talks about launching a crusade to end this religious and military threat that has encroached so close to them. They promised all the members of the Fellowship land and new citizens to convert to their religion. When it was time, tens of thousands of Baitosian crusaders marched with their Prislahana allies to destroy Zenubius. Zenubius, who ended up being vastly outnumbered, called on religious zealots to rise up and defend the land, and mobilized a decently sized peasant army. But the Fellowship answered back, promising the tribe of Caratolo, a member of the Braga Empire's religion and culture, most of the land of Zenubius' empire for their assistance. Caratolo marched west and defeated Zenubius, while the Crusader army crushed the recently raised peasant army. As soon as it rose, it fell, and though a few more skirmishes took place between the members of the winning party, the Braga Empire was gone. Zenubius fled north to seek refuge. And yes, we finally get to talk about Fort Ass. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Fort Ass, a nation all about building forts and guarding the secrets of agriculture. And that's pretty much it, actually. They will pop in and out of relevance for the foreseeable future. Fort Ass took in Zenubius, and as far as we know, he lived out the rest of his life there. Now, this is a good time to talk about the region of the Dahe, because Zenubius had his hands there too. He created a small colony on the coast in the south with hope of improving trade, but when he was defeated, the mushrooms raided and seized the colony. Now, who are the people that live in Dahe? And when I say the Dahe, I'm referring to the civilizations that live along the Dahe River, which was named after this dynasty, the Dahe Dynasty. So what has gone on here while all the other things have been going on in the world? Well, they were divided into 3 kingdoms, the Northern Quick, the Middle Dahe, and the Southern Shanwei. The North and the South united into a royal marriage, but when the emperor died without an heir, they broke up. They briefly reunited in another royal marriage, but a rebel faction disposed that emperor too. Then, the Dahe dynasty attacked those rebels and conquered the south, while the original dynasty fled to the Fellowship of Baitos, and the Dahe dynasty began to invade the north. You get all that? Good, because neither did I. And there's pretty much only one person that played the game that could tell you what happened there. In the midst of all of this, the AOI sees the colony from Zenubius as his empire is collapsing, and immediately become another player in the politics of the Dahe. This is just what the Dahe dynasty wanted to avoid, being this close to regional unification. They now have a major threat directly on their border. First, Emperor Feng of the Dahe dynasty denounced the mushroom presence by stating, "Those damned mushrooms are coming too close to our land. We aren't too happy about that." Shortly after, Feng hired a mercenary company to seize the colony for himself. But the Dahe wouldn't be itself if it were that simple, because shortly after, those damn rebels in the north that they had been fighting decisively defeat the Dahe dynasty at the river. This causes the army to go into a full rout, leading the newly proclaimed Jilong dynasty to chase them all the way south and force Emperor Feng out of the country. The Jilong conquer the entire river region and are the first in history to do so. Though now the Jilong hold on to territory that the AOI had wanted, and the Fellowship of Baitos holds on to a claimant of the empire. What could go wrong? The last thing that we need to talk about from this part of the game is arguably the most important and would have huge implications on the future and the rest of this game. In the far north, there are 2 powers aggressively expanding, Karpor and Orkani. Karpor, a human civilization, and the Orkani, orcs in the far north, led by the warlord Thessalon. Thessalon had allied with the eastern Orcish tribes and wanted to march on the final defiant Orcish tribe Kaleas, who had refused to help him. Karpor had unified with 2 other tribes and accused its last remaining rival, Sargenta, of harboring convicts, and used that casus belli as a reason to send its army into Sargenta. Very quickly, the north had plunged into deep chaos, and for no real reason other than blatant warmongering. The people caught in the middle, the Eldari, had very little time to react, and had to quickly make alliances to protect themselves. All of the Eldari tribes allied themselves to Kaleas, the final defiant Orcish tribe. The player tribe of Eldari also allied to Sargenta, and promised them aid if Karpor attacked. The north was immediately put to the test, a battle between warmongering and diplomacy. Karpor marched into Sargenta, and after a brutal battle, took over all of its territory. The Eldari moved their army to the north side of the river that marks the border between the tribes. Karpor moved its army up to the southern half of the river. Eventually, they clashed in the river, and the Eldari broke the Karpor army. Eldari forces chased the remaining bits of the Karpor army south into the core of Karpor's empire. In the north, a stalemate had begun, with Thessalon and the orcs unable to break Kalis in his home city, and the Eldari tribes on the river. The stalemate was only broken when the main Eldari army was able to move back north, and with a new united force of 50,000 troops, destroyed Thessalon's army less than half the size at the Battle of Moonland. This war was kind of a mess and didn't really make any sense, but the peace that followed was very important. To start off, Moonland, the Eldari tribe most closely allied with Kaleas, unified with them to form the Orcish human nation of Kaldari. The rest unified with Eldari to create the Eldari Council, as well as annexing the Karpor Empire. To top it all off, the 2 nations formed an alliance, forming a truly formidable northern power bloc. The warmongers in the north had been defeated, but all eyes were now on the Eldari Council, who were by far the largest and most powerful nation in the world. This was the tribal age of Inkunzi. Highs and lows for many, but a base had been set for what was to come. Though the North was dominated by a new superpower, the South remained divided. The AOI and the Fellowship had flexed their strength and defeated formidable enemies, and the Geelong had finally established a hold over the entire Dahe River Basin. The way the world had been set up here would have far-reaching consequences into the future. The great game had begun. In the next video, we will cover the events that unfold in the South, and after that, we will cover the North.